Wanted to just welcome everyone to the fourth event in the Lean Into Allyship series. And I know this actually is continuing to be a nationwide discussion because I've had people from Portland, various areas of California, all the way to Boston reach out prior to this event. So I'm really excited that this is keeping the national attention. And I just want to discuss a few housekeeping things before we jump in. And I want to thank the generator. So they have graciously continued to provide the technology to make this event happen, but also the back-end support. So you don't typically see that on the event. They're making sure from a security perspective and monitoring Q&A. So they're doing a lot of support to make this event happen. And so just a huge thank you to them. And I did want to clarify the difference between some organizations you're going to hear. So I just mentioned the generator, and I've heard there's some confusion on, who the generator is compared to Nehemiah and Justified Anger. So very concisely, the generator is a startup accelerator that operates in Madison, Milwaukee, and Minneapolis. And when I first tried pulling this event together on really short notice, they reached out to me via social media to support me. And really to pull this together, which was amazing from a technology perspective and support, and they've continued through the series. And then Nehemiah is the Center for Urban Leadership Development. That is the nonprofit that you're going to hear about. That is what Dr. G founded, and I will briefly introduce that in a minute. And then Justified Anger is an initiative within the Nehemiah organization. So you can learn more about all of that at nehemiah.org, but just wanted to clarify that because I know as you're hearing those potential names throughout, it can cause some confusion. I do want to pause though and ask that you strongly consider donating to Nehemiah as well. So as you look at the panel, and really supporting them for the time that they're taking to educate all of us. And we can't expect them to do that for free. And so we will send that as a follow-up as well, but really want to stress that to start the event. And for those who work in American Family Insurance, I've had a few people reach out to me for the corporate match and finding the right Nehemiah. Continue reaching out, and I'm happy to answer those questions as well. So the general flow tonight is going to be about 20 minutes talking about current events, and then we're going to jump into an hour-long discussion with a panel about the documentary 13th before we end in a wrap-up. So we want you to be driving the discussion, and we'll talk about, again, how to do that, but we had such a high engagement last time that we're going to be leveraging a lot of those unanswered questions from the last event. But please start entering your questions into the Q&A section right now. The chat section has intentionally been closed because, again, for security reasons and Zoom bombing, we will be sending resources out that way and links, but please leverage the Q&A section. So with that, I'll kick over to you, Samantha, to just talk real briefly about current events.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Dan. Welcome, everyone. Thank you to Dr. G and our panelists and for everyone here on the call with us tonight. As Dan said, we are so grateful and honored to be hosting this fourth session in our series. So as we get started, we wanted to spend some time first acknowledging and unpacking recent events of racial injustice that continue to plague our nation. So while this Lean Into Allyship series was initiated in response to the senseless and tragic murder of George Floyd, we are all here tonight because we know that George's story and others like his and Breonna's and Jacob's and Ahmaud's and Tony's and so many more are not isolated events. So since this is a conversation, we wanted to first take the opportunity to pause and ask everyone to take just a minute to share in our Q&A a few words on thoughts and emotions that may be weighing heavy on your hearts and minds since we last talked. I know that we took some time to kind of ground ourselves in that during our last session. We do truly want this to be a dialogue and a conversation, and we love and appreciate hearing from you and kind of knowing where you're all from and where you're at in your growth. So if you would take just a moment to share that with us in our Q&A. Like Dan said, unfortunately for security purposes, we can't, you won't be able to see what everyone is sending in, but we will, and we can certainly work through and gather those for our future reference to and ongoing sessions. So while we just take some time and input those thoughts and emotions and sentiments, we really appreciate you sharing those insights, and we can kind of get started on one of our first topics as we talk through some of these current events. We invite you to share any questions that you may have related to these topics, and then also begin to share any questions that you had while watching our focal content for tonight's session, which again was the documentary 13th. We have this second installment of the series around 13th because we had such rich and deep dialogue around the documentary in our last session, and we just knew that there was so much more to dig into and unpack and work through. So if you have outstanding questions from the last session, or maybe you weren't able to join us the first time around and you have had a chance to watch 13th or watch it again and again, like I think so many of us have, anything new that you wanted to share with us, we would love to hear from you, and we can certainly work to get to your questions and comments throughout the night. So Dr. G, if we can go ahead and get started. We can see some Q&As coming in. Thank you so much, guys, for what you've been sharing. But Dr. G, to get started, so many of us have been following Breonna Taylor's heartbreaking and infuriating story for now more than half of this year. We know that recent news has confirmed that Breonna Taylor's family will receive a $12 million settlement from the city of Louisville, but still we know that no one has been arrested for her murder. And in fact, only one officer has been fired. So tonight, Louisville is preparing for more protests and possible civil unrest in advance of the state attorney general's announcement about whether he will charge the officers in Breonna Taylor's shooting death. Louisville's mayor has declared a state of emergency after police said they would restrict access to the city's downtown area. And we just know that that is, such a serious and ongoing scenario, that's unfolding consistently in Louisville, again, for more than half of this year now. So in Breonna's case, and too many like hers, it is like a history repeating itself. They will pay the family, but they will not arrest the officers who killed her. That's not reform, that's bribery, right? In so many ways, that is the truth of the lens that we're watching this through. And the trauma for Breonna's family and her community and the Black community at large, and truly for much of our country as a whole, is so deep and ongoing. And I'm wondering if we can take some time to share perspective on how reparations are a piece of the puzzle, but the action or lack thereof in the case of Breonna's murder and so many others represents just this broader failure of the system.
Sure. That's a very complex question, and it probably requires a complex answer. I'll just say that this is so messy, Samantha, on so many levels. First of all, I appreciate you and Daniel so much in continuing to partner with us and bringing these very meaningful discussions together. I look forward to these. I just want you both to know how much I appreciate you and appreciate this. On one hand, there's a sense of joy because someone has recognized that there was something wrong took place with Breonna Taylor's death. But at the same time, $12 million will not make the parents say, and the family say, oh, I feel better. We can put this to rest. So that's all swirling. And it makes me ask the question, how much are communities willing to pay for the status quo? $12 million is a lot of hush money, because you can do a number of things. Sure, you can create a fund in your daughter's name. I'm the parent of a daughter. No amount of money would make me forget what was done. But particularly if there's some type of gag order with it, if there's some type, and again, I don't know if this is the case, Samantha, but if there's something that just says we're going to shut it, or you can't proceed any further on pressing charges, it's just sad. I personally don't think that it falls into the category of reparations, because regardless of who this happens to, if you're wronged, you're fired, wrongly by a city government. Sometimes, there'll be a case and they'll settle with you irrespective of your background. So they don't necessarily call it reparations, but the money doesn't take away the pain and the angst. And it's not just Breonna's family that they're trying to hush. It's the Black community, and it's our non-Black allies who are saying enough is a flipping enough. No, you don't. Even if you pay us, even if you gag them, we're going to still talk about it because we haven't forgotten what's taken place. And, if I'm understanding this correctly, her boyfriend didn't know who was breaking in and shooting because they didn't identify themselves. So he got into trouble for responding. And it just keeps bringing the senseless death and how worthless our lives seem to be with people. And it's so difficult to say that because there will be others who are saying things like, but $12 million, what else do you want? We want justice. We want to know that this is not going to continue to happen. Are you going to pay $12 million to every Black person who's been gunned down unlawfully by police? And what's so hard about making an example of someone who did the wrong thing? In any job, if you break the rule, we all have jobs. We understand that there's certain rules. There's certain things that we can't do. Mm-hmm. If we do those things, why would we assume that we can keep our jobs? I'm a nonprofit executive. I'm a pastor. I can't extort money. I can't take money from organizations and spend it for my personal things. I can't do that. I understand that will get me fired. It can get me in jail. I understand that. Why would I expect to not be held to the standard that I was sworn to, committed to, and trained for? Why would I think that I'm above the law? I can do that and just say, oopsie, it was a mistake. I didn't mean to put it in my own account. When you kill someone, you don't announce yourself, you kick in a door, whatever you do, you kill someone innocently, like where they're laying down. Isn't that worth a job? I mean, we lost a life. We can't lose a job or two. With $12 million, couldn't you have still given them their severance? So I could just go on and on about this, Samantha, but it's just, we understand that there's so many in the public eye who don't value our lives. Don't try to prove that we have cheapened our own lives by trying to buy our silence. And so when I heard that, it just hurt my heart, because there will be rioting, there will be unrest, and then the parents will be torn between, and the family between, wanting justice and not wanting people to tear things up. And so when do they get to rest? Is that $12 million going to buy them rest? Is it going to buy them vacation? And these same departments, these same cities will say they can't find $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for training in cross-cultural leadership development. They can't find $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 to bring someone in to help them think differently, to help train them, but they're going to find $12 million. So it's really sad. And I still am shocked that it is so unsettling to people that people are outraged about this. We want justice. It's almost as if they're saying, what do you want?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And I know, Dr. G, you had asked us prior to the event to also just give a quick, our take on the current event. I don't want to take more than a minute or two to just quickly talk through that and then open up another question for you.
Sure.
So, switching over to the Jacob Blake case, right? And just obviously there's been multiple comparisons between how Jacob Blake was handled versus Kyle Rittenhouse. And I'm not going to get into that, other than an unarmed Black man was viewed as more dangerous than an individual carrying a semi-automatic weapon. And so it just gets to the point of what we're going to talk about tonight with 13th, about how through history, the Black man has been continued to be viewed or portrayed as a criminal, unarmed. And so wanted to just continue to hit that home. But the other piece that I wanted to talk about is the generational trauma that's not really talked about. The fact that he was shot at point blank in front of his kids, and the trauma that's going to cause those 3 kids. And then we'll probably blame them later on in their life for things going on and not ever tie it back to this event. So I just wanted to call attention to that, because that is a lifelong impact for 3 other individuals in addition to his family. And then the third point I wanted to call out is I initially set these discussions up right in reaction to George Floyd. And the sad thing is that in between each one of these events, there are multiple other murders that are either surfacing because of videos or are actually occurring, and we can't even keep up with them between events. And so I just wanted to call out that this is new to individuals like myself and individuals in the white community that are getting more awakened, but this is nothing new to the Black community. So for those who are listening, it might be new to you to be seeing this in the news. It is to me, because I wasn't aware before, but this is not new to those on the call in the panel. And then lastly, I started this early on in our first session, that I think it's easy to be emotional during watching these videos, right? Seeing a knee on an individual's neck, or seeing Jacob Blake being shot at point blank. But I really hope those listening are just as angry about the daily systemic realities that are facing the Black community, that are more subtle, more invisible, because it's not a video that you can quickly see. And so just wanted to quickly call out to those listening, think about the disparities in employment and wealth, education, housing, healthcare, in addition to what we're going to talk about tonight with surveillance and obviously criminal justice. So with that, I'll stop. I want to turn it back over to you, Dr. G, and ask you a really open-ended question about what's your perspective on the current events, whether it's Jacob Blake or otherwise? And then Steve in the audience had also asked about just what do you think about Noble Ray working on the Jacob Blake investigation, if you want to comment on that as well.
Sure. I'll just say I'm so floored, Dan, about current events, because we'll have an experience a few months ago and we think, all right, this is pretty bad. It can't get any worse. And then it'll get worse. And then it'll get worse. And so I don't even know where to begin. The president coming to Kenosha and not visiting the Blake family, the discussions about right-wing Christian groups raising money for Kyle, being lauded as a hero. I'm thinking about the fact that we're still trying to find a narrative. People are still trying to justify in their minds why the police officer would need to shoot him point blank 7 times. I have not seen the George Floyd incident in its full entirety. I just didn't have the stomach for it. So to date, I still have not. When I got the text through some media outlet about Blake being shot, I couldn't believe that with everything that's going on, and it's my home state. So I watched it, really trying to see if it was a hoax, what was going on. I counted the shots in my head as it was going off. It shook me on such a deep, on the psychic level, on the emotional level, on the physical level. And so one of the things I want to say to the folks who are part of this event tonight, one, I appreciate your being here and appreciate your wanting to lean into allyship. And if I may for just a moment, just play on the word lean. Leaning is really about shifting one's position, not out of guilt or coercion or fear, but out of comfort. So often, and I learned this in a training, I've used this in speeches since, that sometimes when we don't understand a person's perspective, our body language will indicate we're not necessarily in agreement. So if someone says something that we don't understand about their life, their poverty, their experiences, we tend to lean back as people are saying things we don't really understand. And one of the things that this trainer said to a room of social scientists and human service professionals was, when you're feeling stretched and you feel like you cannot relate to what someone is saying as their experience, lean in, move your chair closer, scoot in, and really lean in. Let your body language, your posture communicate to the person with whom you're engaged to understand that you're not freaked out, you're not disengaged, you're not writing them off, but lean in. And sometimes just that posturing can allow your brain to function a little differently, to allow you to capture some things that you might not otherwise capture. And so what I want to say as we go into further discussion, and I'll get to the other part of Dan's question, I really want to encourage you all to lean in, because I'm hearing discussions about whether it was Floyd having a fake $20 bill, or Eric Garner having cigarettes that he was selling illegally, or things about Blake's background. We know more about the innocent man who was shot than the guilty man who shot him. It took us days to even know his name. Think about this. Charles Manson. I'm a kid of the 70s, helter skelter, mass murders, but he lived to see trial. John Gacy, pedophile in Illinois, lived to see trial. Ted Bundy lived to see trial. Mass murderers and rapists lived to see trial. And when justice is served like that, it's a lynch mob. And so I just want to say that for centuries, we've been lynched. Men and women who look like me, think like me, feel like me have been lynched for posing a threat, whether it's economically, sexually, professionally. People have felt afraid. My thing is, if you haven't done things to people, you don't have to fear people. But my heart is heavy on one hand. However, what gives me encouragement is that for those of you who want to be allies and who are here to really strengthen your allyship, that you learn to lean in, you learn to educate, donate, affiliate, But you would also not settle for easy answers. That whatever he did, whatever his record was, it was not as severe as that of Charles Manson, who was a mass murderer and probably a rapist and is still living, unless I missed his death. And so let's keep in mind that he's innocent until proven guilty. This is still America, right? He does have a right to a trial, to appear before a jury of his peers. That's what we want to keep in mind. But the narrative changes so quickly, and you'll hear that. What about the protesting? What about... And so I just want you to also lean in and to understand that there's a difference between protesting and rioting. But also, we know that people are infiltrating these ranks. We're not stupid. We know people are infiltrating these ranks and they're causing trouble. It happened in Ferguson. People are writing me and saying, Dr. G, my daughter was downtown and there was a man breaking windows and he was white and he followed her to a car and he clearly was not part of the movement, but he was there making trouble. What should we do? Who should we? And this is like a reputable educational leader in our community. This is real. We don't have to make this up. We don't have to make this up. So I would just say, Dan, I'm heartsick, but forums like this one, and the discussions and the people that are following us, the people who are supporting us who haven't before, people who are listening to my podcast who didn't, those are signs of hope. In the midst of being beleaguered, I must stop and say that people are listening and they're engaging and they're learning. And my plea to allies is don't become beleaguered, don't become weary just because we don't get the results right away or it's hard. Continue to lean in and not walk away from it because it's difficult or because there's no easy fix. And Dan, I'm trying to remember the question that you said was in the room. Do I still have time for that?
You most definitely do, and it was just about just your thought on Noble Ray working on the Jacob Blake investigation and what expectations you have, and that came live in the chat from Steve.
Oh, you know what? I feel good about it. I have a lot of respect for Chief Ray. He's no longer our chief, but I still call him Chief. We've worked on committees together. I have lots of respect for him, and I feel that he will be judicious. He will work to be fair. He understands the gravity of this moment. He's not going to be swayed or be pressured by people because he's African American and feel like they're going to question what he's doing. But he's also strong enough that he's not going to bend under the pressure of those who are white to show that he can be impartial. He's a stand-up guy. He's going to look at the facts. He's made a career of making tough choices, making good discoveries, and really being committed to the right outcome. In Milwaukee years ago, Dan, there was a priest, a prolific Catholic priest, Father Grappi, and he was a social activist way before his time. At one point, Milwaukee was called the Selma of the Midwest. Chief Ray came up under Father Grappi's tutelage. He grew up going to his meetings and others. He grew up understanding this. His parents protested. He comes, in fact, I would just say that his family probably knew several Black Panther members pretty well back in the day. Not that they were part of but they walked closely to those who were trying to bring about great change. I think that drove him into law enforcement, and particularly the leadership, by being our former chief. And so he will bring not only his sensitivities and interviewing and intervening skills and mediation skills, he will bring a lot of passion as a person who's grown up under these pressures of disparities, and he will do whatever he can to eradicate that. And so I feel very proud. My brother's a police officer in Chicago. He's actually the one who made me aware of it. He wrote me and asked if I knew him, and I said, "Why? Is he doing something with your team in Chicago?" He said, "No, he's leading the charge in Kenosha." I feel good about that.
Great. Well, thank you for answering that question,
Sure.
Again, in real time from Steve. And now we want to transition into the panel. And so again, I know each member of the panel is incredibly busy because of the high engagement after the last event. All four of you quickly agreed to come back tonight. So wanted to stress how privileged the audience is to be listening to these four individuals and the deep respect that both Samantha and I have for all four of you. And so just as a reminder, we have a few questions coming in the Q&A. Keep those questions coming. just ask for your patience because we are trying to balance the 15 to 20 unanswered questions from last time plus the new ones that are coming in. So we're going to probably try to make this a little bit more of a speed round tonight. But again, we want to make this as engaging in real time for you. So for those who weren't here last time, could you just, each of you just briefly introduce yourself and an overview of the work you do, and then we'll jump into some of the questions. So maybe we could start with you, Dr. Karen Reece, and then we can go around.
Great. I am Dr. Karen Reece. I'm the Vice President of Research and Education at Nehemiah, and really happy to be here again. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, so I always welcome an opportunity to spread the truth. I do several things at Nehemiah. The criminal justice related things include an annual workshop on the criminal justice system. So I review mass incarceration and then the Wisconsin prison system, followed by the Wisconsin community correction system. So we're going to be announcing those dates. If you're interested in going a little deeper on that, you can attend those. I also staff our criminal justice table for justified anger, which pulls together stakeholders from across the criminal justice sector in Wisconsin, with representatives from the state, county, and city level, with Dr. G and Mr. Dillard as co-chairs for that. So those are just a few of the things I'm looking into. Oh, one other thing is a class at UW that is called Intersection of Healthcare and Incarceration. So preparing our future healthcare providers to work with people who are either currently incarcerated or who have experienced those challenges.
Anthony Cooper, would you like to go next?
Sure. So sorry about that. Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Cooper. I'm the Vice President of Reentry Services and Strategic Partnerships. I work with men who are coming home from incarceration, and I also work with the state and federal institutions, as well as I'm a part of Governor Everett's board of the Public Defender Board, as well as working with well, Dr. G is my boss, as everyone should know. But yeah, so and also I develop different relationships throughout the community, doing job development and over our housing, our houses that we have here in Madison as well.
Great, thank you. And then Jerome, would you want to go next?
Good evening. I'm glad I can make it in tonight. I'm Jerome Dillard. I am the State Director of Ex-Incarcerated People Organizing, a statewide organization of directly impacted people who are advocating for human and civil rights for those incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. I also co-chair the criminal justice team of Justified Anger with Dr. G. Work closely with Karen on that, and that's it.
That's still quite a bit, Jerome. And then last but not least, Dr. G.
I'm Dr. Alex G, and I'm the president and founder of Nehemiah Center for Urban Leadership Development, which we started almost 30 years ago. And people that I have the privilege of being on this panel with have taught me so much about the area of mass incarceration and the importance of it. And so I think all people really need to know about me tonight is that these are incredible people, and they continue to teach and inspire me about the importance of redemption and the necessity for hope.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for introducing yourself. And this first question is going to be a series of questions. We tried to kind of consolidate some of them from last time. So take this any way that you want to. But Michael last time had asked, are there any efforts to repeal the clause in the 13th Amendment? And can any solutions truly be effective and long-lasting as long as the monetary temptation exists? Again, talking about the prison systems being privatized. And then similarly, Kate had a couple questions about the clause in the 13th Amendment. Is that one of the right goals to change? And is deprivatization of the prison system one of the right goals? So kind of what's in at play, and are those the right goals to even be going after right now?
Jerome, do you have insight on the clause in the 13th Amendment?
I know that the Advancement Project is working right as we speak today on adjustments of I believe it's the 14th Amendment, the clause that says that we all have a right to vote. I know that they are introducing something at the first of the year, around one of the amendments to try to change the Constitution around unless you've been punished by a crime.
Yeah, and I think the constitutional change is definitely one of the long game kinds of ideas. Those things take a long time to get through and to change. A constitutional change takes an enormous amount of support. So definitely worth working on, but it's not something that's going to change how things are soon. I think the question about privatized prisons is a great one, and I want to point out a difference in how we usually think of this. So when we say private prisons, we think of prisons that are run by Corrections Corporation of America or these DO Group, these big corporate conglomerations that are traded on the stock market. That is a form of private prisons, but they incarcerate a very small percentage of the people who are incarcerated in the United States. The bigger issue that we have to look at is the privatized services that our governments contract to run our prisons. So a vast majority of healthcare services in prisons across the country are contracted with private agencies. Canteen or snacks that people can order with the funds that they have, those companies are private. A lot of times laundry services are private. Repair services in the prison, they're private companies. So even though the prisons themselves, like Wisconsin doesn't have any private prisons, privately operated prisons, the number of our industries are run by private companies, and so then they still have an incentive to keep their contracts going. So we need to get off of the focus on only privately run prisons and start getting into these industries that serve either primarily or just majority prison systems.
I'd like to add, though, there's a growing population of individuals who are being imprisoned in their homes and in their communities. GPS is widely used around the nation, which imprison people pretty much in their homes. I think that's a real issue also.
And those are private companies that provide the GPS
private
monitors.
Companies. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And Jerome and Karen, many people on those GPS devices, they have to pay for them, don't they?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I think people forget that that's a big kickback to a company that's providing this surveillance on on the individuals.
Right, and there's a difference between there's pretrial monitoring and there's sentencing that's monitoring.
Yeah.
And so some people might have the option to get out of jail while they're facing processing their case while it works through the court system. But if their release contingent on being able to afford the bracelet, that's just another level of
That's right.
Penalizing people for being poor.
Yep. Great point.
Excellent. Thank you both. We can pop over to another topic Carly in our last session had asked. The documentary mentioned that it was problematic when drug addiction was identified as a crime issue as opposed to a health issue. To your knowledge, is there any legislator in the works that we can advocate for that would assist in reframing and reclassifying from crime to health? I know we talked about the framing of the war on drugs quite a bit last session, but we did not have a chance to address this question specifically.
I feel that the timing was strategic. It came right on the heels of the Civil Rights Bill when the tough on crime rhetoric began, and what they called the Southern Strategy, and the fact that it started in the 70s, and I saw vast addiction issues within the community I grew up in as a boy in the 70s that only escalated in the 80s and 90s. Bill Clinton really sent it to a whole different atmosphere when he spent $26.6 billion to incentivize truth in sentencing laws, 3-strike laws, to build prisons, money to build prisons. And, here in the state of Wisconsin, we built between 1994 and 2004, We built 9 prisons and bought one that private prisons came into the state and built. That's 10 prisons in 10 years. And there's a saying that if you build it, we will fill it. And I think that's part of the problem why we have individuals in our communities now who are struggling, cycling in and out of prison every 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. They're in and out of prisons. And that's because of how community corrections is doing business to incentivize sending them back in. So we really need a transformation of our criminal justice system in this nation, but it's not happenstance. You know, on the heels of Brown versus the Board of Education, they came with what they call the learning disability, and which I was a victim of. That was, you know, put in a class where it's supposed to be slow learners. There was no teaching, and you know. There were many who were impacted by that diagnosis of learning disability.
Oh, you're on mute.
No, I'm sorry about that. I just want to underscore what Jerome is really saying, that if you look at our history, and I'm saying this so that people can contextualize mass incarceration, if you look at every major step that African Americans, freed slaves made, there was some level of legislation that pushed us back. Even coming out of slavery, moving into the period of Reconstruction, you didn't see the proliferation of the KKK because we were considered property. Even though it was chattel property, we were still considered property, which meant we had a value. And so you couldn't just readily go and kill someone else as slaves. But when Black people were freed and were able to grow corn and beans and compete against white farmers, then we became expendable and a threat. And so what I want to challenge our allies, folks who are leaning into allyship, is to not just look at mass incarceration in a bubble. We're going to get more into the deep discussions, but to ask yourselves, what is this a response to? And that's what Mr. Dillard is alluding to. So I just want to underscore that. When he brings up Brown versus Board of Education, the heel of civil rights legislation, there was also Voting Registration Act. So there were some major things that took place there. It's just something for us to keep in mind. We're not trying to build conspiracy theories, because if we just bring it out to the light and just tell the truth, it's no longer a conspiracy. But these are things that have happened and continue to happen. Black people make strides to advance.
Yeah, and related to the addiction thing, I just want to emphasize that addiction is a disease. It's a disease like cancer, like diabetes. Some people push back and say, well, you have to make a choice to use a drug. Well, you also have a choice to eat a bunch of carbs and sweets and potentially develop type 2 diabetes. You have a choice to smoke and get lung cancer. And we still treat those patients with humanity and with dignity. And drug addiction is the same thing. It really is tied very tightly to mental health issues and mental illness. Mental illness is another thing that is really complicates our criminal justice system. A lot of people with severe and persistent mental illnesses are in our prisons because there's no other option for them. But even people with very common ailments like generalized anxiety or serious depression, when you're trying to manage under extremely stressful circumstances like incarceration or like community supervision, that really just exacerbates the symptoms of those diseases. And so it's really important for the allies out here to think about, really work on, if you're not with this, convince yourself, look at the literature about why this is a disease. And then the tricky part about this is that both substance abuse and mental illness manifest, symptoms are behavioral. So it looks like someone is choosing to be mean. It looks like someone's choosing to be criminal. It looks like someone's, so we say these are choices when they're really symptoms of a disease. So it can be difficult to separate those things, but it's critical for us to make a change in that area.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing all of that additional context, Karen. That was great. And since you just mentioned this, Jerome, there was a question actually from Natalie last time, again, about how do we overturn harmful laws like the 3 strikes law, mandatory minimums, truth in sentencing? Is the only way to do it by electing officials who can overturn these laws? Can it be done at the state level, or does it need to be done at the federal level? So again, a lot there, but how do we start to work to overturn that? And maybe it's a long-term solution again.
Yeah, I think number one is engaging in the political process. That is a key. But the fact is, we've been asking for reform forever, and it's time that we transform the system. And that is taking those, reversing those laws that are on the books. Many states have. Many states are looking have reversed some of the laws that contributed to mass incarceration within them. So, the law. And I didn't hear the second part of that question. It was that one.
Let me get back to it just real quick about just really, is it really can only be done at the federal level or state level? And then can grassroots organizations, this is something that was yet another follow-up, create change when it comes to these issues?
Yes, at all levels. But right now, what we're advocating for is state level, and I believe that with our Unlock the Vote campaign, we're trying to reinstate the voting rights of 45,000 who are in our communities, paying taxes, working, and many active in the community, but yet and still they can't cast a ballot. And I'm seeing it happen all over the country. I saw it happen in Louisiana when the New Orleans Saints got on board and said, yes, people should have their voting rights. That was a state that you lost your voting rights for life with one felony. Actually, Iowa, one of the last states to have a lifetime ban. The governor just signed a executive order that once individuals are done with paper, like here in Wisconsin, they can cast a ballot. So, grassroots, we can get some things done. I'm seeing it being done all over the country. Florida is a prime example of grassroots organizing and the involvement of directly impacted people. And I think we can do it here in Wisconsin. What's amazing about Florida is they turn around and say, well, if you owe fines, fees, and restitution, then they still can't vote, which is a debtor's prison. But they have raised over $30 million paying off fines, fees, and restitution so people can vote. And we're on a major campaign right now to reinstate another 110,000 individuals in Florida. The right to vote by paying off fine, fees, and restitution. And I think we're going to get it done before Election Day.
That's so amazing.
Yes.
We do have a number of representatives, elected officials in our state that are working on some criminal justice reforms, but really we got to really take ownership of what our elected officials do, what they work on, and what they take responsibility for. They work for us. Your elected official, you're their boss, and so you need to tell them what to do. And most of the elected officials that I've talked to say that their phones generally aren't ringing off the hook. Their mailboxes are not full. Sometimes when there's a big issue or a drive to make calls, they are. But in general, they're not hearing from constituents. And we're still suffering from the tough on crime narrative. You heard that through the 13th about how we really, crafted this marketing campaign starting in the 70s about why people should be afraid of public safety. And so we're still suffering from the idea that anytime an elected official makes a change that decreases incarceration, defunds correctional systems, or goes to treatment alternatives instead of incarceration, they're looked at as being soft on crime, and then they're afraid that they won't get elected. So they've got to hear from the people who believe there needs to be reform and from the people who know that we are actually much safer if we make these changes in the long run. And one tip is that you don't have to have the answer when you contact your elected officials. You don't have to have the answer. One common deflection tool is them to say, well, we have a very tight budget. What would you suggest I cut? That's not my job as a citizen. My job is to tell you what I want to see. It's your job as an elected official to figure out how to make it happen. So don't wait until you know everything to contact them.
Absolutely. It's hard to kind of keep straight all of the content sometime right across our 4 sessions, and then also just through all of the resources and education that I have found access to through Nehemiah and Justified Anger and Black Like Me, and so many of the resources that just you on this call provide and work so tirelessly, to make sure it is consistently new and generating out there for allies and allies in training, right? I think that basically everything that each of you has talked about has referred me back to one of Dr. G's Black Like Me podcasts, right, that dives so deep into this content, and so much work that I know Jerome and Karen that you both do too. So much of what you have dedicated your lives to is around this work. I know that on the Nehemiah website, I believe that you guys have templates, right, for reaching out to and contacting representatives and making some of those outreaches. I don't remember exactly where that is, but I know those are tools that you all have shared in the past. And I think just especially right now, that is so current and relevant, and kind of on trend, and definitely some of the questions that we are seeing come in. So basically just a quick plug that there is so much endless learning and content opportunity solely through the incredible works that these individuals on this panel bring to us on the daily. So through Nehemiah and Justified Anger and Black Like Me podcast, and Jerome, all of the incredible work that you do. But if I could move over to one of the questions regarding this that has come in, and now I can't find it. Where is that? It was one of the new ones. There's so many good ones, which is awesome. Okay, so this is from Kermit, and he says, what advice, challenge, or encouragement does Dr. G and the panelists have to offer about the upcoming elections and getting out the vote? We know that these things are just voting and getting out the vote, right, is far from sufficient, but these initiatives, these bold, decisive electoral actions seem absolutely necessary. Can we get some insight on where you're all at with that mid-September?
I'll just jump in a little bit and just say, everyone should vote. We need people to vote. But I think in addition to that, Samantha, there's an assumption that there's probably a party that loves mass incarceration, then there's another party that just loves Black people. Regardless of who's in the White House or what group they represent, we've still been so hurt, abused, ignored over the years. And so what I would really say to my white friends and colleagues who want to wake up and be allies, I would say that they need to vote, but I also say reach out to your elected officials and say, we are not going to fix our race issues or our disparities by just voting one person out of the White House. What is your plan? What are your strategies? Are you listening to Black people? Put the pressure on the folks, and you all know me, I'm going to call them on both sides, all sides, on the Democrats as well, because just because they have not supported Donald Trump does not mean that they support the proliferation of Black life, of Black experiences, of Black wealth and economic development. And so one of the things you can do is reach out to your elected officials and ask them, so what's your agenda? What are you doing? Who are you listening to? How are you going to make this better for our Black colleagues? So that's one thing I would say.
And I'll just throw in, follow what Jerome and Expo is doing, Expo and also the ACLU. They're working really, really hard on this and have a lot of different methods and ways that you can get involved. So I'll just pitch that to you, Jerome, because you guys are killing it right now.
Okay. Yeah, well, we've integrated voter engagement and relational voter program has been, that's been our focus. I just feel that, we need the excitement that we had in 2012, 8, Barack Obama's first term, and the turnout and people being focused on casting their ballot. I think that, many of those same people did not vote in the last national election. So we need to push for that. There's a myth about directly and formally incarcerated people. And what's been amazing to me is those who are able to vote, who I talk to, who have finished their sentence, saying, I can't vote because I'm a felon. But that's the narrative that's been pushed. All throughout your incarceration, you hear you can't vote, you can't vote, you can't vote. but never do they tell you, well, when I got out, they informed me that my civil rights had been reinstated and that I could vote, but they have not done that in many years now. And individual, just educating them and trying to help them be educated voters. You just don't go ahead and vote, but be educated. Know the platforms that individuals are running on. So that's some of the work that we're pushing. But our Relational Voters Program project has been phenomenal, with 10 people reaching 10 other people, and we're doing it with individuals inside the walls, inside Wisconsin prisons. We've touched over 300 who've touched 10 people for us. So get out to vote.
And one thing that just recently came to my attention was people with misdemeanors, at least in Wisconsin, can vote, unless it's a certain type of misdemeanor. But misdemeanor crimes usually draw a jail sentence, or often will draw a jail sentence. If people are in jail with a misdemeanor, there's currently really no method for them to be able to cast their vote. I'm not even sure if if they're not registered their address at the jail, I'm not sure if they can even get an absentee ballot. So that's one highly overlooked area that we don't think about. How could we set up temporary voting options for people who are currently in the jail?
And if I may add, we often talk about people who are disenfranchised and finding ways to get them to the polls, to the ballots, to vote via mail, all of which is important. But I would also say to my non-Black friends, talk to your friends, because it's Black people didn't vote Trump in. I'll just say it like that. Black people didn't do this. And so we have to also look at the flip votes. Some of you will have to have the tough conversations and just ask, what side of history do you want to be on? And you've got Black friends, have you looked at what's happened to African-American people? Have you looked at what's happened to the quality of life? Have you noticed the proliferation of crime? I think our allies have got to talk to each other as well, because if we get people who have not registered to vote, and we get people to flip their votes because this didn't work out the way some of you thought that it might, or your relatives thought that it might, I think some people who are allies may have to have the tough talk about this, because this shouldn't be off the table. Someone's got to talk to folks about what are we going to really do to heal this country.
Awesome. And Don, who is working behind the scenes right now, Alex just asked if you could put additional information in about Jerome's work in the chat, or we can always send it afterwards out to everyone. I saw that you just put in there about the voting rights. So just quick plug too. So as Samantha was sharing all of the resources that are coming from Expo, Nehemiah, and obviously Justified Anger is the initiative, we will make sure we get all of this out to you as the attendees as well. So I know Don is doing an incredible job right now sending all of these links. Just know that you will get these resources. But that's just a huge kudos to, again, the panel for having all of these available literally within seconds. So thank you. And then I wanted to jump to a question that came from Kermit. And Kermit, thank you. I know you've been very active again tonight on the Q&A. You were last time as well, so thank you. But kind of going along with what we were just talking about the loss of the right to vote after a felony conviction. Even after paying one's debt to society, you're blocked from being a full citizen. How can that be changed on the broader level, in addition to then the inability to vote?
Well, right now it's up to the states to determine how that looks for individuals with arrest and conviction histories. National movement, or a change to the Constitution is truly needed in order to change it nationally. But right now, you have 2 states you can vote while you're in prison. You have some states you can vote once you get out of prison and you're in the community. I've seen a growing number of those states and right around us in the Midwest here, Illinois, Michigan, Pennsylvania, just to name a few. You have your right once you're back in the community. So, it's up to the states pretty much at this time. And that's why we're pushing for legislation to give individuals their voting rights once they're back in the community, which is a compromise in reality.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jerome. Karen, Dr. G, did you have anything to add?
No,
Jerome covered it.
you did.
Awesome. Nailed it, Jerome. Okay, let me pop over. Some of the recurring content that we're getting is definitely back around our bail systems. James from our last event had asked, how should the bail system be modified or ended? What are the barriers to change or discontinue? The purpose of bail is to ensure the accused makes it to court but ends up penalizing poor people. The biggest barrier is tough on crime and public fear, misunderstanding of the system. I know we talked about this a little earlier in the session, but we also have gotten a couple additional real-time questions around this as well. So if that's something that we can just go into a little further, I think that would be helpful.
And this depends a lot on counties. So this is at the county level, largely where these decisions are made on whether or not judges are asking for a lot of bail, or are they doing mostly signature bonds? What's the reason that people are in there? Dane County, it turns out, doesn't have a significant percentage of people generally that are only there because they can't pay bail. We do a lot of signature bonds here, but that's not the case for elsewhere in the state. So it really is about contacting your district attorney, contacting your circuit court judges, and bringing the issue to their attention. One other really complicating factor, though, is people who are, in Dane County, we have about 30% of our jail population who are there on probation holds, community supervision holds. This means they violated a rule and they're in the jail while that rule violation is being investigated, or while the Department of Corrections proceeds with revocation. So in other words, working to get them sent back to prison. If there's another crime on the books, it doesn't matter whether there's a signature bond or bail set for that, because they can't get out until that hold is lifted or a decision is made on that. So along with the bail issue, that's a big one. I did want to point out, someone mentioned in the chat, there are a couple of really good bail fund organizations. One locally around Madison is the Free the 350 Bail Fund. They've raised, that's, if you want to donate to that cause, that is an excellent organization to give to. There's also a really good one in Milwaukee. And I guess I'll just say, with the highlight on bail in this country, we recently had an issue in Dane County where Free the 350 Bail Fund bailed out. There were like 3 or 4 Black women in the jail. They bailed everyone out. It was a lot of money that they paid, but they issued a press release because it was pretty significant. The sheriff then issued a press release pointing out that violent criminals were released on bail. Well, the problem with this kind of thinking is that, as the person who asked the question pointed out, we're presumed innocent until we're found guilty. So, we're entitled bail. So no one in the system should be fighting that unless there's a very, very good reason where there's obvious violence, imminent violence for the community if the person gets out. So it gets complicated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jerome.
No, it's debtor's prison. That's what it is. And the fact is, Karen mentioned it. I was thinking about also touching on this, and that is, even if you get a signature bond, you're still held. If you're on any form of community supervision, you're still going to be held on a hold. And I know that we're pushing the Department of Corrections to change that. And something's coming up next month. I got to zip this, but some things are going to be coming out next month. I think are going to be pretty significant in how community correction does business. Keep you posted.
And Jerome keeps mentioning debtor's prison for the people who are Constitution buffs out there. That is in our Constitution. It's called peonage, which means just incarcerating someone because they can't afford to pay a bill. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing that all over the place in our system right now. So that is unconstitutional. And in many of our laws, that just hasn't been caught because we tend to say, when someone says this is for public safety, we don't ask questions.
Yes.
Right? And so we have to start asking questions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you both. Thank you, Todd, for the associated question that he had asked here this evening, and then to Madeline, who had given that early feedback around free the 350 and the Milwaukee Freedom Fund. Oh my gosh, say that 5 times fast.
He's on it.
And Erica, thank you as well for being extremely active tonight on the Q&A. So you've asked a few questions, but I actually haven't seen this question come in. So I'm curious to hear the response about just comments on what measures should be tracked inside the racial justice space. And for Erica, because she's doing work now at the Department of Justice. So just curious on the reactions to that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I mean, there's so many ideas that I would actually like to sit down. I'll probably email you, Erica, because I think there's a lot of different ways, or maybe we can have a conversation. But, one thing is gauging the sense of where people are on the tough on crime. So we generally, just like we see with the police departments in the public conversation these days, there really is this us and them mentality about if we criticize the criminal justice system, that means we're personally insulting people who work in the system. And we will never make change if that's the attitude we want to have. We have to be able to look at the difference between systemic issues and an individual's intention, right? So, kind of doing a survey of where do people that work in that system, where are they in that mindset? Do they tend to be towards the law and order side? If they've worked in law enforcement, many times it will be that, referring to people who commit crimes as, with derogatory terms, or, really that this is the scourge of the community that needs to be cleaned up and that's our job. That that is just not helpful for anybody. It doesn't make a good society for any of us. When people finish their sentence, they're supposed to be able to become productive citizens. So, what pieces in there? And then all of those questions are very, very tightly linked to racial justice. When you find those law and order mindsets, you usually find quite a lot of racial bias there too. So just kind of digging in there.
To your point, Dr. Reece, if people were to go through a training school or an educational program and they lacked efficiency or proficiency, the system would be questioned. What's wrong with the school that children can't read? What's wrong with this driving school that children can't pass their driver's test? What's wrong with this culinary program that a person can't get certified? If the prisons continue to release people and have not served them, I mean, Jerome talks about services that he should have received that he has yet to receive. If it's a penitentiary where the whole purpose is to make a person penitent, where they think differently about their crimes and they have the skills to educate themselves and better themselves when they come out. If any other system continued to fail, we would sue it. We would shut it down. We wouldn't let them make hamburgers. If there's a faulty meat packing firm, they'll recall all the beef. They'll recall automobiles. But yet we keep allowing this to happen, and we blame the people who are in the systems as if they have broken the system and they are incorrigible. We just have to use a little bit of common sense and a lot of unity on this. This is just wrong. We don't measure anything else by a standard like this.
Yeah, and it's been said that, look at this European prison system and look at this system here and look at this system, but we're strictly punitive here. It's not rehabilitative. And not only that, but even how individuals are treated inside. Offender, you're an offender. And I've had someone to tell me that in the community, because they're in the community, that doesn't change them being an offender. It'll never leave my mind when I heard that. But the fact of the matter is, when it comes to crime and criminals, there's a black face on that, predominantly male black face on that. And so this tough on crime rhetoric that's being spouted in this day and time is just playing on people's fear. And we saw it in the 13th in the film. Well, I can't think of the president's name when he showed Birth of a Nation in the White House. And that was a fear fueling film itself, that these black men are going to come after white women and rape them. And I saw a commercial recently where the senior lady called 911, and they say, well, if if it's this type of crime, we'll get back with you. And then they're saying that you pick up the phone at 911 and there's no help. That's playing on fear and tough on crime rhetoric. And it has to stop. It really do, because it's targeting us.
Dan and Samantha, can I just comment on something we talked about already?
Yeah, of course.
The conversation about what can you do locally and with your elected officials. There in Dane County, there's actually a resolution that's being proposed tonight to the Public Protection and Judiciary Committee. I'm not sure what happened with that yet, but it's basically a resolution from the county board saying that they oppose no-knock warrants. That is what allowed Breonna Taylor to be killed, was busting into the house without knocking. This goes back to the Nixon administration, and where we really started to see our Fourth Amendment rights start to be systematically deconstructed. In fact, no-knock warrants is one of the issues. When people came over here from England, they were getting away from policing practices like that took away their right to privacy. So the Fourth Amendment basically guarantees us the right to privacy and to due process. And so, you can look, I think it's a movement, Jerome, maybe that people are starting to ask their elected officials to oppose no-knock warrants, and have the county board declare that the sheriffs cannot authorize no-knock warrants. So that's another thing that you can look for. And it basically just means that people have to have notice, right, before you come into their homes. And if you read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, she outlines a lot of this, where in the 80s, when we start having this truth in sentencing concept, the federal government incentivized states to pass truth in sentencing laws by giving them big federal grants. And when they had these federal grants, that's when we started to see purchasing of SWAT equipment. That's when we started to see small police departments or sheriff's offices buying these big MRAP tank-like vehicles. And before the 80s, and I think it was actually in Wisconsin, was Michelle Alexander outlines one of the first use of SWAT for something that wasn't like a hostage situation was in Wisconsin. And so before all of that happened, the only time people would use no-knock tactics or SWAT tactics was when it was like someone's robbing a bank, there are hostages, we need to go in and get people or they're going to die. Not because someone is selling drugs on the corner, or allegedly, as we don't even know for sure. So that's a really important step to take.
Yeah, communities were traumatized. Children were traumatized with no-knock warrants. They used battery rams, taking down half a house on drug arrest, and these traumas just keep perpetrating themselves within the community from these type of actions, and our kids aren't getting help for this stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you both for those responses. I think a lot of the questions that we get that we don't always specifically address are questions around what exactly can we do, right? And a big part of this series is acknowledging that it is not the panel's responsibility to tell us what to do and when and how to do it, right? As allies, that is our responsibility. Racism is a white people problem. That is, why we are here. That is why we are committed to, learning and unlearning and growing in our allyship to move forward with these, good works for a better future and a better tomorrow. It is not a fair request to ask for a perfectly laid out yellow brick road as far as what to do next and how and when to do it. But moments like that are very helpful. And a lot of the questions that do come through with kind of like specific context for, in this scenario, what would you do? Or what are some, useful tactics or things that we could look into further? So just again to all of the attendees, right? Just as all of us on this call in agreement that it is certainly our responsibility to continue growing and finding those next opportunities and ways to continue leaning in. I did want to touch on a question from last time from Heather, and she said, we recently had a car stolen. 2 of the people being charged are children, 15 years old. We advocated for them to be placed under the supervision of family. Is this the same as being incarcerated within the community? How can people better advocate when they are directly involved in a case, something like this? How can people advocate on a political level when this conversation hasn't really started yet?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really important question, and something that's really on people's minds today. I mean, I think under the supervision of family, I don't think that's necessarily the same as incarceration. I mean, there in those situations, I mean, there has to be some kind of oversight and supervision that's going on. But I think the bigger issue is, why are we seeing this increase in kids stealing cars? Why are we seeing these incidents being looked at as strictly criminal in all cases when kids have been joyriding for generations? That's certainly a racialized way of looking at these things. So I think that issue is tangled up. There's a lot of different threads that come into play. The South District Madison police captain recently emailed constituents, or on his blog, asking what should happen for kids that are, teenagers that are arrested multiple times for crimes like this. And my response was simply, listen to the people who have been telling you how to reallocate funds in the community for decades, right? I mean, part of the problem is we've increased budgets for police departments, corrections, even during our deepest recessions. And we've systematically defunded education, social services, welfare systems, all of those support systems that are supposed to exist in our society. We've just been gutting them in favor of corrections budgets. So we've got to people have to demand radical action in, our very next, this is budget season for all of our boards right now. What are you going to push on to make sure, okay, maybe the police department doesn't get to hire 10 additional officers this year? And they have a valid concern saying, well, we've got so much to do. Okay, well, let someone else do it. Pay someone else to do it. They want it. They're trained to do it. Let them do it. So I think the heart of the issue really is about the systemic change. And I'm sure Dr. G and Jerome, you can talk more about the more community issues related to that. But that's what comes to mind for me.
I think you knocked it out of the park, Dr. Yeah. And I just underscore that. I love when you make those kinds of comments, because people can verify what you're saying. You're not saying the attitudes towards certain people has changed, or you're not saying things that can't be quantified. Look at the budgets. You have the budgets for corrections going up, even in recession. What's happened with education and human services? I think people get a lot of confusion when we're talking about how you move, how you defund, or how do you really transform the system. If we were doing things on the front end, then police officers would not have to always pull people. That's a bad analogy. If you do some preventative things, you don't have the same pressures on the back end. That's just common sense. I've been in human services for my whole adult life. We understand that. We used to fund prevention, and then it just stopped. It used to be gang aversion. It used to be all these things. Mm-hmm. Now everything is curative, restorative, rather than being, So I just think, I just want to again stress to the folks who are here with us and who are learning, who are leaning into allyship. You're getting lots of good information from Karen, from Jerome. It really doesn't get much better across the nation. And I'm not just saying this because they're my personal friends and colleagues, but because they know their stuff and they're committed to this. Just let that settle with you. In all the times that we're talking about budget crunching, why do we have time and money to put people away in prisons when an alternative of keeping them out would be much cheaper? What then motivates us to do that?
Yeah, we sure have a failure rate when it comes to our children and individuals returning to our community from incarceration.
Right.
You know, they downplayed the recidivism rates, but for years, it's been lingering around 70%. That's a horrible outcome for the dollars that we're spending. So we need to look at who's delivering the services for those dollars. There's huge contracts for services for individuals who return to our community. Huge contracts, but yet and still we have a failure rate at 65 to 70% continuously. So I'm saying we need to look at who's delivering the services, and these services need to look more like the communities these individuals come from. I'm a big supporter of peer support, and you know, we still haven't gotten to the traumas that many of our kids are dealing with, and really not realizing that there are traumas. But the simple fact is, we call no one in when a traumatic event happened. You know, these shootings that some of us in FIC have been responding to, very little trauma-informed care are coming to the loved ones and the witnesses of these traumatic events, and so we do need to invest. And I'm pushing for justice reinvestment. It's something that's worked all over the country. That's how Texas were able to cut their prison population and invest a couple of $100 million into communities from the savings. It's not saying spend all the money that is saved, but it's saying at least take 50% of those funds and invest them in the communities for where these people, these individuals are coming from. We need role models. We need big brothers. That's what they need. Uncles, big brothers, community leaders to surround, to embrace them and to mentor them. That's what's needed. You know, the war on drugs took out hundreds and hundreds, if not millions, of big brothers and fathers and grandfathers and uncles. There's a saying, you cut off the head, the body will fall. The men in our community have been a target and continue to be. And so we have to engage men into with our young men. I don't want to ramble, but I just wanted to say that.
It's so hard for me to try to jump in. I want all three of you to just keep talking. So thank you for sharing all of that, and I could just listen for hours. We probably have time for one more question, Samantha, and then we'll wrap up. But you just mentioned something, Jerome, that Amy mentioned early on, and that's recidivism. And she mentioned that she's seen a lot of evidence that the Compass program to predict recidivism is incredibly biased, and yet many states, including Wisconsin, use this in sentencing decisions. And I'm going to queue up a podcast that just came out where you and Karen talked about some of this as well. But how can we as citizens help get this removed from consideration?
As a researcher, it just makes my head explode. First of all, when we talk about evidence-based practices, the science addressing evidence-based practices says that you use tools like, not Compass, but like Compass, and you combine that with your expertise and wisdom. Those two things together make for the best decisions. Compass has been known for a long time to have racial bias, interviewer bias, gender bias. Now, the biggest problem with this is that to change a tool like that requires validation, which means that the government agencies have to pick a new tool that's better, that already exists, and that has been validated, which means it's been run on a number of different subjects already. And then they have to bring it in and do their own internal validation, where they run the Compass and the new test side by side to make sure that they get good results. So it's a massive project, a massive undertaking to choose these tests. But that said, if you have gotten a blood test from the doctors recently and look at your kidney function, there's actually a multiplier. Go in your My Chart and look. there's a multiplier that's used because there's a difference in the way African Americans process that chemical compared to white people. So guess what? They figured out the math and they added a number that makes it a little more fair. We could do that with some of these tools if we spent the time looking in to identify the bias. The problem is that we don't have people in the working in the system who are willing to admit that this exists and willing to take the steps necessary to fix it.
And the fact is, I mean, really, you hit it right head on. And as you said, Karen, for years, we've known that it was racially biased. But the problem is, Department of Corrections, Wisconsin Department of Corrections overpaid for that. They paid millions and millions of dollars for that tool. And so, they continue to use it because they invested in it.
And one tool that's related, we were hearing about algorithms being used for judges to determine who should get bail, who should get released, and things like that. A lot of the tools, the vast majority of these tools use factors to calculate the risk that are steeped in racial bias. So if we know that Black people forever have been arrested at higher rates, convicted at higher rates, and there's a racial disparity in that number, then we have to make an adjustment where we're using this as a tool to determine risk, because we know that it's artificially inflated. So we got to think about, mathematicians, where are you at?
Thank you guys so much. Lots of comments on those. On that topic, Madeline had asked what kinds of policies can help create incentives to hire formerly incarcerated individuals. Right now, it seems to be out of the kindness of individual employers. Then Todd later on had just said that being in IT, he sees IT careers as an answer to many challenges. I can't remember if that's something that we had talked about in a last session or if Dr. G has talked about in his podcast, but I know that specifically is an area that we have touched on before. And Todd had said that AmFam just started working with the Last Mile, which is Next Chapter in California that trains formerly incarcerated individuals in IT skills. And do we know of anything that is similar in Wisconsin, and anything that you guys know of or have thought about, potential opportunities or anything underway?
Well, there's been a small investment in a couple of regions for transitional jobs in Wisconsin. I'm a firm believer that it's going to take systems, business, and community. And that's someone who I have not seen at the table a whole lot, and that is the businesses. I'll raise this up, but Ron Johnson visited a prison and that I worked at, and hearing the stories, he said, "There's something I got to do." And I say, "Well, you're a businessman. Connect businesses with individuals who are returning." And he started the Joseph Project, pretty much in Milwaukee, that is really getting individuals some living wage jobs. It's not enough. It's a few big companies, but we need business at the table. I mean, living wage is what kept me from being a 4-time recidivist. I was in and out 3 times, but when I found a job that paid me living wage with benefits and retirement, it was life-changing for me. And I found some normalcy. On a dishwasher's pay, it's tempting to supplement that income with what you know. So living wage employment is huge for individuals returning to our community. It's really a must.
One thing I'll say is that people can reach out to our staff. Anthony Cooper, one of our vice president of strategic partnerships and reentry services, had to jump on the plane to come home. But he and his team, largely on Anthony's shoulders, have placed probably 400 individuals in jobs. And so we're currently working with the local business to develop some training projects so that employers can understand the benefits. you fill jobs. I mean, let's just talk dollars. Let's move beyond altruism. You got jobs you can't fill. There are people who will work and who will work hard. I know because I've hired many of them. And so I would say, please reach out. Please reach out to us. Don will put that in the chat room. But we're working to, so have your employers. If your company's trying to figure it out, reach out to us, because one of the things we want to do is to coach and help companies think about the benefits of this.
And we are having a lunch and learn on employment. I believe it's November 19th. So please tune into that. You're going to hear from formerly incarcerated people as well as former or current employers who are hiring people. And it's really like, this is important to get employers in this conversation because they've been subject to the dogma and the stigmatism just like all the rest of us. So I mean, we've got to get our employers informed and not believing the myths.
Thank you so much.
And I hate to have to wrap this thing up. So we are at time. This kills me.
I was trying to avoid it. Just
I
keep
know.
it.
But thank you, Dr. G. Thank you, Dr. Reece. Thank you, Jerome Dillard. And obviously, when Anthony Cooper was able to attend, he obviously had to jump off. Thank you for the insights. And I love the passion that really came across again tonight. And again, thank you to the generator for the support and for the technology. So just as a quick reminder, let me share my screen here. Wanted to put in one more plug about donating to Nehemiah. And so I know I received some feedback. We promoted the Solidarity team previously, and there was some confusion, a little bit of confusion on that. So Dr. G, could you just give a quick summary of what the Solidarity team is, just to clarify that for folks?
Sure. The problem of disparities that we're addressing, that we're all aware of now, aren't going away anywhere soon. And so we have to make sure that our supporters don't go away anywhere soon. And many people save their philanthropic gifts for the end of the year, and it's great. But if we can have regular monthly income to help us create educational programs, help provide opportunities to change and challenge systems, we need to be able to count on consistency in our support. And in the past few years, we just realized we're not going to be ashamed or feel awkward about asking for help, because we're not just doing this for ourselves, we're doing this for all of us. And so the Sustained Solidarity is asking for 1,000 people who will do some amount on a monthly basis. If you would click the link, become part of that team, you will help our efforts tremendously on both the personal and on the systemic level. We have the tool for addressing these issues. We need to make sure we use support and went into the information almost as if it's education, and not really donate and commit themselves. And when you donate, you're more committed to the issues. So please, not just because we need it, but because you need to be connected to something that's making a difference, consider becoming one of the 1,000 people who support us on a monthly basis.
Awesome. And again, for everyone, we will send this out in the summer email from Justified Anger. So you'll have the link to click on this if you feel compelled. And then there was a couple other opportunities about some upcoming mass incarceration related events from Nehemiah. So would anyone want to just briefly talk about the upcoming virtual lunch and learns and what people would be really taking away?
Dr. Reece, why don't you do that?
Yeah, sure. So October 8th, we wanted to just kind of dive more into voting. So looking at the impact of incarceration on voting. So you'll hear from a few people who voted for the first time in the last couple of years, grown adults, who voted for the first time. And then on November 19th, as I mentioned, we'll be taking a look at the impact of incarceration on employment. So these are short. There's not a lot of opportunity for interaction in them, but you do get a chance, again, to hear from people who have been incarcerated and have experienced these things, as well as from people who are working in these related systems. And then I don't know if there's a slide for it or not, but there will be, hey, there we go. Series. And I've done this every year since about 2012. So basically the first one on October 6th is an overview of mass incarceration. We look a little bit at history. October 13th is an overview of our prison system in Wisconsin, and October 20th is looking at community corrections, and you will hear from people who have experienced these systems as well.
Awesome. And I think on just a really quick fun note, and then there's a couple podcasts I want to promote. So just before this event, we had a quick discussion, but Working Draft is actually a local Madison-based brewery, it's not probably, my favorite brewery in Madison, especially now, but Dr. G's been doing a Black Like Me Imperial Stout that sold out faster than I could even buy it. And then this is the Justified PA. So it's an IPA West Coast Hazy. So there's a picture of him actually brewing at the brewery. So just know that it's pre-sale on Wednesday. You can pick it up, I believe, at Nehemiah right on Thursday.
Yes.
And Working Draft will be there as well. And then just a quick, again, promotion for a couple recent podcasts that have come out that I've enjoyed listening to. So don't let the conversation stop with the panel here. Dr. Karen Reece and again, Jerome Dillard broke down mass incarceration and talked about revocations and recidivism and really go into, I think it was about an hour and a half. So good. Hour 15. So definitely listen to that. And then episode 113 that came out right after that, again, is the Tough on Crime. So you'll hear more from Jerome Dillard. And again, if you're listening to and have subscribed to the podcast, one of the first ones I listened to was episode 3 after I went to the Just Mercy screening, and that's where Jerome Dillard again breaks down mass incarceration. I'm sure there's many between episode 3 and 112, but the focus on that. But those are 3 with the panelists that I think you guys would really find a lot of value in. And then just a quick closing comments is to the challenge of what are you going to commit to? So I think it's great to continue coming to these sessions. It's awesome that you are showing an interest. And I've had a lot of people vocalize their commitment to me that they're all in. And I want to challenge back to just show me in your actions, whether just the next thing. It doesn't have to be public. It can just be for you, but take the next step in whatever space you feel comfortable, whether that's educating, affiliating with a local nonprofit, whether it's Justified Anger or something, some organization close to you, or again, donating. So again, we will send out all of this content afterwards. There has been some confusion and we'll work through that about the follow-up email will actually come from Justified Anger. So you'll see that, and then again, watch for future events. We're gonna actually go into a little bit of a visioning session to see where we can take this next. And I think with that, thanks everyone for attending and have a good night.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, this is wonderful.